Hello and welcome to another episode of Mic'd, the official podcast of St. Michael Catholic Church, Gastonia, North Carolina, where we are invested so we can be transformed, so that we can be fully the Lord Jesus Christ. I am your host, Shane Page, the Director of Evangelization here, and I am joined this week once again with the avuncular Father Rossi. Father Rossi, we are so glad to see you.
Which word was that?
Avuncular.
Avuncular?
Yeah, you never heard the word avuncular?
No, I can say never. What does
it means, well, even though you're a father, it's really a misnomer of a word to use in this context. An avuncular, someone who's avuncular is very like an uncle.
Okay.
They're like, give good advice, and they the avuncular Father Rossi. I'm trying to expand everybody's vocabulary, including
you're
mine.
working, because most of the words you use every week, I never into that. That's definitely one. That's good
right.
for you. That I'm sure a lot of our listeners, I'm hoping, are also puzzled.
Yeah,
so I feel
that's right.
so uneducated.
That's right. So last week, the topic was be saints.
That's right.
So my question, are you a saint yet? How are you? Where are you right now on the saint scale?
I think I'm probably a saint in the making. I'm hoping. I've been praying a lot with that desire.
Don't you have to be dead for 5 years before the canonization process, beatification process can even begin?
I think
clear.
that's
one of the rules.
Not clear, so let's say sure. Just,
Okay. I think it's supposed to be 5 years before the beatification process, because you have to have expired for 5 years. So you can look that up, and he can put a little line on the video that says true or false.
I think the diocesan bishop is one who opens the cause. So you can't just, just be like, hey, let's do this. So it's someone I think it's usually a bishop, someone in the hierarchy that opens the case and begins an investigation, and that at the level of, where that's going on. And then, that takes years, and then that gets all sent to Rome, and they review everything, and so it's a very long process. And because we live in an age now where everything's
you have to get it right,
recorded, and if I get caught up for canonization, that means some poor soul,
they got to watch every one of these.
Every homily I've ever given that's been recorded, and every note and every whatever. So they just examine everything about your life. So there's a lot more that's possible now because of technology, but that means we're just going to have to comb through all of it.
Yeah. Well, All Saints Day this week. How was your All Saints Day, your solemnity?
Beautiful day. We had the banners of the saints' faces up, and they're still there now in the sanctuary. We, as you bought those for the youth group, the beautiful banners, you made them. I
made them for the youth group, but other people have used them. It's a great joy.
So I decided, since All Saints Day was coming, they would look nice up in the sanctuary. So now some people are wondering, people get afraid when you say banner in the church, in the sanctuary. They think that like these cut-out felt banners, from 1974. No, they're digital imagery, right, used to create these retractable banners that most people have seen in use now. And they're lovely. You have the faces of Therese and John Paul II and Maximilian Kolbe, Carlo Acutis, St. Joseph, St. Michael the Archangel, Blessed Mother. And then Jesus is not a saint, so he's out in the front of in the narthex now, greeting everybody, pointing to his Sacred Heart, showing everybody just what kind of love he wants to offer us, and that's the only love that transforms all of those saints.
That's right.
There.
He is sanctity as a person. He is sanctity itself.
So there they are. They're all in there, and they look great. And many people were surprised, and as they should be. It was kind of supposed to be a little bit of a surprise, shock factor when they came into Mass to see all these faces staring at them with joy, and your quotes that you have for many of them that you selected were well placed as well. So that was fun, and they're still in there now. And if someone wants to travel down here and look in our church today and through the week, they'll probably still be in there. So we'll see how long we can do that.
Yeah, something about seeing the faces, especially in the age of photography. The Little Flower, of course, is well known. In Maximilian Kolbe, St. Kolbe, we can see their faces.
Right.
And these are not cartoon figures. These are not just paintings. These are real human beings who had real histories, and they are saints. And we can aspire as they did to become saints themselves. Yeah, it's just a beautiful day and a beautiful month. Spend a little bit of time. November, you had mentioned it's the month really where the church begins focusing on the last things.
Right, the 4 last things. So as we And everything coincides so nicely with the seasons. And so now in North Carolina, as in many parts of the nation, are experiencing what we know as fall. The colors are changing in the leaves, and leaves are literally falling. You know, I can look out the window now and see, you know, a beautiful red maple tree that's now almost bare already. But the leaves are falling, you know, and it shows the end is coming, the end of the season, and winter will be upon us. But, of course, then the end of the year, you know, the calendar year is winding down. But then most especially the liturgical year of the church is winding down. So we're into the final weeks of the liturgical year, where we have many liturgical seasons, and then those run their course. And when does the new liturgical year begin? It's Advent, you know, not January. It's Advent, which begins usually at the end of November, with the final feast of Christ the King, the solemnity. That marks the last Sunday in ordinary time and the last Sunday of that liturgical year. So then we will be in a new year, an Advent, and that's always a time when we switch over to another evangelist, which will be the primary evangelist we hear from every Sunday. So this has been the year of Luke.
Luke, he's year C.
Year C. So there's a cycle, A, B, C, 3-year cycle for the Sunday cycles, 3 years, A, B, C. So now that C is coming to an end, we're going to jump right into Matthew, cycle A, for the readings on Sunday. So that will be the majority of the gospel passages for this whole year until next Advent will be from the Gospel of Matthew, and it will be mostly in succession. We will march through the Gospel of Matthew Sunday after Sunday, mostly in ordinary time. You see that more clearly because with Advent, Christmas, Lent, Easter, you get a different set of readings for that time period. So it's not always going to be Matthew. There's a point there, but it'll be a lot of Matthew this coming year, starting in Advent. But before we get to that, we have November, which is the 4 last things: death, judgment, heaven, hell, and those are the 4 principal certitudes that we face. Of course, the possibility of heaven and hell is possible for each soul. We don't know where everyone will go necessarily, but we do know certainly we will die. We do know certainly we will be judged by the Lord in His love and His mercy. We'll be judged in the state of our hearts. How did we love? Were we really on fire for Christ or not? Were we, as you said, transformed? Be invested, be transformed, be His. That is the vision of St. Michael Parish. That is the point of life. That is the point of existence, to be invested, be transformed, be His. We want to belong to Christ, but we can be invested in evil. We can be transformed into evil, and be wicked in heart of heart, and we can be His, meaning the devil's. We can choose. Our choices can lead us to belong to the wrong one, in the wrong place. So this month kicks off with All Saints' Day. Okay, that was yesterday, and then
so we start with those who have made it the wrong expression, but they are in heaven. They
made it. Yeah, they have.
That's
the right way to say it. They made it. The church starts November off with this great celebration of All Saints. It really is a joyful time, and I tell everybody wins, meaning whoever your patron saint is, it's their day, and it's your day to celebrate them. So it's not you have to wait for their feast day. It's like every saint wins today, and St. Bernard, I think it's St. Bernard in the officer readings.
I love it. I'm glad you're bringing that up.
Yeah,
I
St.
love
Bernard
what he
prays.
said.
Yeah, go ahead.
He just said that the saints in heaven, they don't need this day.
Right.
Nothing is being added to their experience in heaven right now because the church has this great solemnity, but we need it. Mm-hmm. We need this day to be encouraged and to persevere. Right,
without a doubt.
Yeah.
So we start off with great joy. The saints, they just make us so happy. And they're our companions. They're our friends in heaven. And there they are, and their faces in the sanctuary, and if your church has stained glass windows and statues and all, which is all wonderful, to have those things. But we can leave the saints in stained glass windows and porcelain statues and great works of art, and they just seem so joyful. They just seem so happy, and they also seem so frozen in time. They can be just sort of, even though we love the saints, we still have issues relating to them, or that's nice. their life, or we go back into this. It just must be something that's not achievable for me. It's too high. They're the spiritual Olympians, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's a problem if we think they're like the superheroes, the spiritual Olympians are in the Olympics. They won. They got the gold medal. Paul uses that analogy of athletes and running races, and it's good. But the point is, we're all in the race, and we're all created to finish the race with God's grace. So sainthood is not out of reach for any of us, because all things are possible with God.
Right, and we were made for it.
And we're made for it. Like that, one of the altar servers was saying after Mass on All Saints Day, he said, "Well, I fulfilled my obligation." And I said, "You have not fulfilled your obligation until you become a saint." I said, "You have not fulfilled your obligation until you become a saint." I said, "Don't make your guardian angel cry either," meaning that our guardian angel's mission is to get us to heaven. If we do not become saints, that angel has to go before the face of God and be like, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
So All Saints Day is a time to get recharged and refocused on what the point of existence is. That this isn't an optional way of being holy. It is the only way, is to be a saint. And so we should all pray every day, many times, Lord, make me a saint. Lord, let your plan unfold for me. Make me a saint. Now, does that mean you'll be a stained glass window, a statue, a patron of a diocese, famous? Who knows? That doesn't matter. The point is, God will glorify himself in your life. Go to heaven, right? And that's where we're meant to be.
Well, just for clarification, I received a question from someone who's fairly new to the faith, and he was just asking, now, it doesn't mean that only the canonized saints are in heaven. And I said, oh no, that means there are millions more saints that we just don't know about.
Correct, right.
Who are in heaven as well. But the canonized saints are those
These
that
are
the church has said, look, we have great clarity that they are in heaven.
Right.
But they're not the only ones.
The canonized ones are there because God wants them to be known publicly by the greater church, right? God has ordained that they be known in this way, the public way, and venerated, because they're, in his divine providence, their witness or example is something that the universal church can embrace. But we can say, people will say, my aunt, my uncle, my dad, my mom, my grandma, my grandpa, my third grade teacher, but they can be saints. They can be really holy people, and we have met and do know people in our lives that just seem to inspire us, and we just we think all the time, and we say, "Oh, they're a saint. They're a saint," well, maybe. I mean, who knows? And when they die, hopefully they will be, right? I mean, but that's the idea. We ought to think like that. We ought to say that person is a saint. That person reminds me of, and why? Because for some reason their life just seems to be so dedicated to the Lord, and doesn't mean that they're perfect. And if we think that's what it is, then we don't know what saints are. They struggle. They ran the race. They fought the good fight. They kept the faith, as Paul says. Not because they were Olympians, but because they surrendered themselves to God in every time and circumstance, and they kept surrendering, and that transformed them. But yes, there are many, many people, millions and millions, and who knows, billions, right? Who knows how many saints there are.
Well, I mean, Revelation says multitudes. There were multitudes from every race and tongue.
Yeah.
He
and
saw
even
in
the
vision.
large groups of martyrs, we honor certain martyrs by name, and we might say, so-and-so in companions, St. Isaac Jokes and St. John de Brebeuf, to think of the ones that just were a few weeks ago in October, the North American martyrs martyred in what is now modern-day Canada, by violent tribal uprisings up there between the Iroquois and the Mohawk tribes. But anyway, their names are known, and then you've got all the other ones who died with them, and you can know their names too. But I mean, there's many, many, many that in that group, and you may not know them by name. You can know their names if you search that up. But again, there's the names that are known, and then there's the unknown saints, which are there. And the priest reminded me, says it's sort of like the tomb of the unknown soldier. The unknown one represents, the ones that are unknown, right, all throughout, right? So there's unknown saints for sure.
Yeah, and I guess since we're focusing on the last things, is that one of the reasons why the reading coming up even this Sunday, the gospel will be about the resurrection. So we're talking about again death. It would be interesting to do maybe a podcast on judgment. There's a lot of confusion about judgment as well.
I think our plan is probably to hit these topics throughout the month.
I certainly don't like the thought of being judged by God, but you're being judged by truth itself, but you're also being judged by love itself. And I always go back to 1 John. I cannot remember the chapter or the verse. It says, brothers, we should have confidence on the day of judgment. We should have confidence. That's what the Apostle John says on the day of judgment. I did think of something last week, though, that I'm going to share now. After our podcast, we were talking about how we're called to be saints.
Yes.
I remembered the sermon or maybe from his book by Rowan Williams. You ever heard of Rowan Williams? He was the former Archbishop of Canterbury.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Really brilliant mind. And he said in this book of his, or the lecture, I can't remember which one it was, that there are really two kinds of people. There are saints, but then there are saintly people. He says you can tell the difference between a saint and a saintly person. He says when you're around a saintly person, they are so good and good in every way. They just make you feel terrible about yourself, like judged. And I mean, everything just seems to be so right about them. They're so saintly. But he says, but when you're around a saint, a true saint, you never feel judged in any way. You feel like there's hope for yourself. That, hey, maybe God's got something in store for me as well. And that when you leave the presence of a saint, you feel joy. You're filled with joy and you're filled with hope, unlike a saintly person who makes you feel less than.
Yeah.
I don't know. I like that distinction. The saints always make you. So if you met Padre Pio or any of the great saints, they would have made you be filled with hope that God's not through with me yet, and I still have time to run this race.
Yeah, so I think that's a good distinction there. That's a compelling thought that Rowan Williams offers. But it is something I find that sainthood and saintliness, as we are calling it, seems to be that which is recognized by other people.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily sure that the saints were like, I know I'm a saint, or at least in the moment,
Right.
I think in their life, I don't think they went around going, well, I know I'm a saint. I think they knew they were sinners and had a deep understanding of their weaknesses,
right,
and were courageous enough to surrender themselves to God's will time and again. They lived with a constant hope, not in themselves. They got rid of self-reliance and trusted in God, and that they placed all their trust in the Lord in every circumstance of their lives. And with the saints, I think that we see that in other people. And that's how it works in many ways, right? I mean, the testimony of others as the church, there's, of course, if the saint wrote or spoke or whatever, there's that, but then there's also what others are saying, the way that they changed their lives, and in the end, it's saints show us God. Like if you're in the presence of a saint, I feel like you want to say, I felt close to Christ. I felt close to the Lord. I have hope. They encourage me to spur on, and I mean, it's not
encouraged.
It's not the encouragement of the world, like, hey, you're okay, I'm okay. Whatever you want to do with your life is fine. Just be happy. That is not the Beatitudes, and that's not what the saints would say. The saints would say, give your life to Christ, be invested, be transformed, be His. That's what you should do with your life. And the one telling you that is the one who's doing it.
That's right.
So I think the witness of that, people know instinctively, well, this person's actually choosing to give themselves over to Christ, and they do seem joyful and peaceful. But the marker for us is suffering, and that was my homily this All Saints. I said, what do they all have in common?
That's true. And Ken and I were just talking about that.
Is suffering. They suffered, and you cannot find a saint and go through life and find nothing but suffering. That's so much. It'll be there.
Hardships.
And hardships. And I think that for us, the saints, it's like, well, they seem to have it all together in their life. Yeah, I know they probably had some bad moments.
Oh, sure.
But my goodness gracious, you look through the trajectory of life, and they had long chapters and periods of tremendous grief and suffering. And that those are the things we will face, hands down, whether you are a atheist or the most open-hearted Christian, you will face suffering.
Right.
And that is the fork in the road. And suffering purifies us, and that's what the book of Revelation says, all the saints says. These are the ones who stood the test of the trial. They endured the time of distress. They were purified in the blood of the Lamb. So the distress, the pain, and the suffering of life has the ability to deepen our love and our faith, or to harden us against God, and to heck with God and this whole thing. And why would he allow X and X to happen to me and my loved ones, and a loving God would never do this. And, I've been so faithful, and then this happens, and I hit my microphone accidentally, But anyway, I'm Italian, that's what you get.
Yeah.
But I think I think of myself too. I'm so weak, and I know, man, I'm so weak and not even heroic at all. And the little sufferings I don't do well with in the daytime that have little consequence, and the saints are dealing with tremendous suffering.
But they have been given grace
yes.
to help them through that suffering.
So that's they surrendered to it, and they let God's will unfold for them. And I think that's the courage they have is, in the end, to say divine providence, God's will allows everything to happen. You're right. Yes, he didn't save that child that died, and he didn't stop that gunman from going in for a mass shooting, and no, God didn't stop any of these things. No, he could have done. Yes, he could have done a lot of things, right? And somehow, we don't understand, in our point of view of life, we do not see the bigger picture. And it's not that God likes the tragedy and the suffering, but that he that we're invited into it in our own lives. And yes, there it is, the horrible things that we suffer at the hands of others, or because of illness or loss or tragedy. But that is where love is purified. It's like, do I really love the Lord? Do I really want to surrender to him in this moment or not? And that's the only way to heaven, is grace through suffering, suffering with grace, as it were. And maybe that's the saints, they suffered gracefully.
But it was still real suffering.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, and even with, you could look at Therese and and others, many of them internal suffering, great tragic trials of faith. Right, Therese it was so hard for her to even think of heaven at one point, right? She almost began to.
She had total darkness of spirit. It was hard for her to believe, whereas belief for her was something that was just a part of her life. But there came a period, her last 9 months, when it was darkness, nothing but darkness.
And I'm going to be honest, that frightens me. What a fright. This is this very holy, devoted Carmelite, young, on fire with divine love sister, little Therese, little flower. To have that experience. But even with, Mother Teresa, after her death, Come Be My Light, reading her book, I haven't read most of it, but the parts that I've been exposed to, she reveals in there that she had this deep internal darkness that she carried for decades. Mm-hmm. No one ever knew it. Mm-hmm. So it's an amazing thing to look at their lives, and it's even with, to say that I think what maybe Therese had mentioned in her life was that she was sort of being asked, the final cross was to carry the atheism, of the human soul, to carry what those souls are like that have rejected God, have despaired, and to experience and to suffer that with them, in the hopes of course, that her suffering, which she offered to God every moment, would allow these hardened sinners to turn back to the Lord. But isn't that...
That's right. She had a desire, and I think that's important to clarify, that many of these saints had a desire given to them by God to suffer on behalf of great sinners. And of course, who is the sufferer par excellence of great sinners but Christ on his cross? Yeah. And Therese, even on her deathbed, her sisters would share her inspirational stories of saints who died in these transports. And Therese was like, why do we have this idea that to be a saint, I have to die in transports, like this great euphoric thing? Look at our Lord on the cross. He's our Savior. He did not die in transports, but in great agony, but for sinners. But she desired that. And the Lord, by a special grace that I don't think will be imparted or communicated to all of us, she was really united to Christ in the darkness of his cross for the sake of other sinners. Let me suffer for their sake, Lord.
Yeah.
But that was something that she actually desired, I believe that was a vocation, a special vocation that God had given her. But she would also say, and as other saints have said, that sacrifice in this life is the proof of love. Right. I mean, there's really no other way for us to really show that we love someone without some form of suffering.
Hands down the truth. And anyone we respect, admire, is always someone who seems to give of themselves for us.
Yes.
This person loves me. Why? Because they give time.
Yes, there's a sacrifice involved.
Yeah, so you're right.
You think about a soldier, the one who loves the country is the one who's willing to die for it, the suffering of the soldier.
And
right?
We say that's the supreme sacrifice.
Right. It's the proof of love,
yeah.
And that suffering can prove our love for God. And it shows us, are we in this for our sake, or are we really in this for God's sake? I'm with you. I mean, I think about some of the trials and tragedies that many of the great saints have been through, and I think, gosh, I don't know what I would do if I were in the moment, in the line of fire. Yeah. But I also know that they were able to withstand and endure the moment because of their cooperation with the grace of God. Sure. They weren't not necessarily alone. They were strengthened.
Yeah, I think the saints would just say, of course, we feel frightened and reluctant, but I think the saints would say, just trust him, and enter into that and embrace it, and just pray for the grace to endure it.
One of my favorite verses of Scripture is in 1 Thessalonians, where Paul says, we do not mourn as those who have no hope. What I love about that is that, yeah, we mourn, we're sorrowful. But as Christian people, we never lose hope. We mourn with hope, and not as though those who are without hope. You know what verse I'm talking about? I don't know. That just is
that's a funeral reading for sure.
Yeah. So in your homily, you had mentioned the parents of the little flower as a part of your, and I heard that you drew some great contrast. Was it on this very topic? Tell us a little bit about that. Not everybody was able to hear your homily.
Sure. Well, I was praying about how to, for all saints, homily preaching and how to draw the faithful towards them, and it was the fact of suffering. What unites them all? What do they all share? Suffering. You can see it in their lives. And as I learned about Saint Therese's parents, Zélie and Louis Martin, and I'm probably not using the right French pronunciations.
That's okay. We're in Gastonia. We're good with that.
Zélie and Louis seem to be the Anglified version, but. They were just canonized last year in October on World Mission Sunday. I think it was October 18th, 2021. So I heard about it, but I didn't really jump into learning about them. But this time around, I used the Hallow app.
Hallow, yes.
Yeah, Hallow. And they did a series on saints, 7 days. And one of them was on Zélie and Louis Martin. And I hit that and began to listen. And I think right away, when I began to learn about all the suffering in their lives, and that they were canonized together as a married couple, I felt like this is so important because being in pastoral ministry as a priest, marriage is, we are so behind as a church on helping married couples, I feel, and encouraging them. And I sense that there continues to be this idea that can float around the church's attitude that, if you're a priest or you're a religious sister and you have a habit and you have a cassock, you're at the altar, you're wearing vestments and you got the collar and all the nice externals of religious life and consecrated life and priesthood, that, it just seems to be like glorified, and if anything, the last several decades have shown us priests and religious can certainly be anything but saintly people, sadly. But any one of us can abandon holiness. And Fulton Sheen says, any person can be a great saint or a great sinner. A great saint can become a great sinner, and a great sinner can become a great saint. That we have the potential for both, right? And so I do think it was so important because, I don't know off the top of my head, listing a lot of married couples, obviously Mary and Joseph, the Holy Family, Christmas time, they're right there. Yeah. But let's just be honest, we know that most people have a hard time relating to Mary and Joseph and the Holy Family. There's not a lot in Scripture to tell us directly a lot of the pain and suffering. There is, certainly with Our Lady. Joseph, it's a little bit more difficult. I mean, it's there, and there's good writings on how that can be seen, and they're so relatable. And in fact, they're always the super. And if Zélie and Louis Martin are holy, it's because they love the Holy Family for sure, Mary and Joseph and Jesus. But looking at their lives and reading through it was just powerful for me, because it really sounded like most of the suffering and the challenges of their lives I've heard about from all married couples, from different walks of life, different stages in married life. I've heard it all from them, and it's like I wanted to really give the parish, like, because hey, the reality is that most people, are married, and sadly there are those who suffer the pain of divorce and broken homes, but most people embracing a vocation today, it's marriage, because that's God's plan. A parish is one priest. And everybody else, you got single people, searching for vocation maybe, but married people, so married couples, so many. You are married with children, So I felt like the Holy Spirit was asking, like, introduce everybody to these two saints now. They're needed now more than ever. And I don't know how much you want to get into about the specifics. I know you know about the parents of Therese too, but this is really a moment in time in the church where they have emerged together. You have at the Vatican a beautiful banner on last year with this married couple together being canonized at the same time. And that, I think, the Lord is doing something very unique in our history. Where is the attacks of the devil hitting the hardest? Marriage in the family.
Well, that's the first place, in the RCIA class, we were looking at Genesis chapter 2, and it's right after God says, and a man shall leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife. Right after that, the serpent immediately appears after the annunciation of the family.
Yep.
And that's not a coincidence as well. I think that Zélie and Louis, they knew what their marriage was for, and they knew what their children were for and why they had children. And they did suffer. They lost, she had four other children.
Yep.
3 daughters, two sons, or maybe 3 sons and another daughter. The daughter died at 4, and then the 3 sons in infancy, so they had to bury 4 children. They had the rigors of a business. Zélie was a businesswoman in a day where that wasn't very common. She was running her lace business. Louis was a watchmaker. He had his business. He was always pressured, open the doors of your business on Sunday. He never would do that.
Yeah, I remember you saying that.
But what's funny is that they, at first, did you hear about this, that they had a Josephite marriage?
Yeah, I kind of use that word, but I kind of a little loosely, but
they did not consummate the marriage because both of them aspired to the religious life.
Right.
She was turned down. He could not handle the Latin and realized that this wasn't his vocation. So they married later in life, and they wanted to preserve their virginity.
Sure.
But it was a parish priest who says, you need to really think this through. And she had a desire for children, but for one purpose. If I'm going to have children, I want them to be raised up to the Lord. I want to have a house of saints.
Yeah.
That's what I want. And they ordered everything about their life around the Eucharist and around the Mass.
That was one of the things when they were first married, as you said, for our listeners, the Josephite marriage. What does that mean? Well, that it means basically living like celibacy within marriage.
Yes.
And so, and the church doesn't. We don't do. As far as I know, we don't do that anymore. In fact, a marriage has to be consummated marital intimacy for it to be valid as a sacrament. But they didn't for a while. They abstained from that for a while. But yes, they were called to open their lives to children, and they did.
For the reason of making saints.
But before that time, when they had the children, they were always going to daily mass. They were very prayerful people. And it was said that in the town they would be up in the morning and they would hear their door open and close, because in a small town you can hear everything.
Yeah, that's right.
But they said, it's just the Martins going to mass. We can sleep a little longer. Right. But the two of them were up every day going to daily mass.
Yep. And frequent visits to Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament during adoration. He wouldn't necessarily stay an entire hour, but if he had his daughters with him, he was like, let's just stop by in the church for about 10 minutes.
Make a visit.
Make a visit. And Therese was very much influenced by that. And she would see her father praying, and she would say, gosh, that must be what it looks like when the saints pray. She was just enamored of
Right.
him. But they didn't, I mean, they were heroic to us, but all they would say to you is that, no, we were just everyday disciplined and intentional about centering Christ in our home. We're going to go to daily mass. We're going to
Yeah.
make frequent visits to the sacrament, and we're going to pray together.
Yeah.
That really was the bedrock of their family.
So the things that were stuck out foundational for me in learning about their lives, of course, was their vocations. They both wanted to be in the religious life. You know, I think he wanted to be a monk, maybe a monk and a priest too. I wasn't certain. It seemed like he would probably be ordained, you know, as well. It's pretty common to be a monk that's also a priest. And then she wanted to be in religious life, and she was told by Mother Superior, "You do not have a vocation of religious life," which crushed her. And then
It crushed
and
her.
then Louis was studying, trying to get ahead, and he got sick, and he realized that maybe that he couldn't continue to do that. So he figured that was his sign from the Lord, you know. But they, you know, I learned that Zélie cried on her wedding day, copious tears of sorrow for that, knowing that this desire she had since a child to be a religious sister would never be fulfilled.
That's right.
You know, so she mourned that, and I think that's important to know even that, because there are people who want a particular vocation. Maybe they want to be married, or they, you know, which is a natural call for us is to be married, but maybe religious life doesn't work out, or seminary life, and it's not God's plan. And
Right.
I think people can feel like, well, there's nothing for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, wrong. God's plan is better than yours. You know, and he had other plans for Zélie and Louis. And then, you know, Louis's mother set them up, as I learned.
Well, she saw him on a bridge
Yeah.
when she was out and about. And she said, I heard a voice say that this is the man I have prepared for you.
Yes.
And they had never met. And she
Right.
went home and told her parents this, and her father was furious. You heard a voice.
Yeah.
And she goes, no, this is the man, you know, that I heard the voice say, this is the man I have prepared for you. And then they eventually had a conversation together. I cannot remember where they met, but sure enough, they dated for just a few weeks, and it was time
Married
to get
in 3
married.
months. 3 months were married. So like listeners like, whoa, yeah, the church says 6 months, so don't worry.
She
We're
was
not-
close to 30 years old, I think, before they married.
Okay.
I think he was
Wow.
34. So then in that culture, that would have been much
So
older.
that's amazing too, because you have 9 children. So yes, they lost the 2 first sons, both of them named Joseph, both in infancy, both to
Mary Joseph, both
malnutrition.
named Mary Joseph.
Oh,
They named
Mary
all of their children after Mary.
Okay.
They certainly
Mary
did.
Joseph.
Yeah.
Okay. And then they had a little. Well, then the 5-year-old girl, the daughter Helena, she died of infection. I
Yes,
think.
it was very sudden.
Yeah. So 5-year-old girl. So, but after the first 2 sons died, Zélie's father died also 10
That's
days
correct.
later. So you have this mother who's buried 2 little baby sons and her father. And what I learned was she would go through the cemetery weeping, and she would just kneel at the grave and the headstones, and she couldn't pray.
And guess what was and what was going on in her own body? There was a growing cancerous tumor growing in her breast.
So she
at
had
this
breast
time.
cancer.
She
I
had
couldn't
breast
find-
cancer as well.
Okay, so
in a day where that was not treated, but she had pain. Therese almost died of malnutrition as an infant.
That's
That was the
right,
last
yeah.
one. She could not nurse her child, and so they had to hire a wet nurse to feed Therese. And so Therese was living with this wet nurse for like 2 years. And then Therese was able to come home after 2 years, and of course Therese had attached to her wet nurse.
That's another point to make too. You know, there's only so much in a homily you can unfold, but they needed wet nurses for most of the little children. So I think, and then just so our listeners know that, you know, getting someone to breastfeed the child for you because his mother can't do that. But it is, of course, that's a suffering. Mm-hmm. You know, you cannot feed your child, you can't nurse your child, you can't have that experience of nursing your child. For mothers, that would be a great pain to experience that. But then, you know, when all that sorrow of the death of children for children dying at different times for different reasons, and you know, so you have that happening. But then you have what they're left with, 5 daughters, right? But then you're right, and then you brought up her breast cancer. So how many people have breast cancer today? How many people have suffered? How many people have loved ones who have died from breast cancer? How many have it right now? Mm-hmm. You know, Zélie had it. Zélie died from it. This is true.
And it was a horrible pain.
And Therese was 4 years old, and that was the moment that really crushed her, and rightly so. But even with, I learned about Zélie's patience. and she'd climb the stairs. Therese would be climbing the stairs, and Zélie was the lace maker, so she's intricately working with her needle and Mama from the stair, and then okay, yes, my child, is she still around? Is she looking at her? Yep. She goes up one more stair. Mama, she's trying to stitch, and it's like her patience is summoned every time the child says, Mama, and then she would go and finally climb the stair and pick her up to go up the stairs. And then why is this foundational? Because this is exactly the memory that Therese uses later in her little way about going to heaven. Like, she's not going to climb a staircase. She's going to use an elevator, and the elevator will be the arms of Jesus that will just pick her up in her weakness and carry her to heaven. And that's what got her a doctor of the church, that among many other things that she's written, Therese. And here now, and many people maybe don't know this, now we see this is Zélie. This is her mother who taught her that example to say, well, I'm going to use an elevator. Instead of, I'm not going to climb a big, long staircase. I'm too weak to do that, to go to heaven. So I'm going to use the elevator. Jesus' arms of love and mercy will lift me up, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yep. What child's parents would not raise him or her up when the child holds out his or her hands saying, I can't reach. That's what our loving Lord will do.
And that is really a great moment to pause and say, that's the prayer for sainthood. Every one of us is to do that. You raise your hands and say, I can't reach. Yeah. Correct.
Yeah.
But I can make it happen for you. I will make you a saint. Let me lift you. Let me do it. It's not a quietism. This isn't. That's correct. This isn't. Yes. I don't have to do anything. This means you have to lift your hands up. You have to cry out in prayer. You have to try. You have to let yourself be lifted up. You can't balk and kick and throw a fit. But I learned too that Therese had fits, and Zélie was very tried.
Yes. She was
stubborn. She would throw herself on the ground, and little Therese would kick and scream. And it's funny. I mean, Therese she was a saint. She was spoiled.
She was a spoiled little
girl. She was spoiled,
and
people need to know that. And it was kind of allowed, right? I mean, the family spoiled her. But after Zélie died, Louis was then a widower. And lived by him. He never remarried, so he had, but now 5 daughters that he loved, and they adored him. They called him, their king, and he loved his daughters, and did everything he could to make life better for them. Before Zélie died, she really asked Louis to move from, I can't say the name right,
Alençon to Lisieux.
Yeah. So
be closer to her brother and his wife.
So to move from there to Lisieux was hard for him because that was everything he knew, Louis, and where he had his prayer place and just everything. Moving the daughters to Lisieux was difficult. So another sacrifice, but he did it. And but then we find other loss, right, from Louis' life. And you can probably pick that up. What else was he losing then at that
his
point?
Own daughters. Yeah. Eventually his own daughters were not to death, but to the Carmelite monastery.
Were they all Carmelites? So one went to the Poor Clares, right?
One of Leonie, she was. Now, she kept coming back. There were convents that would turn her down, and that was a real strain for them.
So everyone went into the Carmelite?
All of them eventually ended up in the Carmelite monastery, and we have to understand what the Carmelite monastery was. It's the most austere order. You don't see each other anymore. You don't talk to each other
cloistered,
anymore.
So we did
cloistered. Okay,
cloistered,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, the cloistered. So people say, what's cloistered mean? It means they live in a contained convent, which means outsiders are only brought in, and that includes anybody, even family, only brought in under the strict regulations. And there's a grill. They say not like grill you cook hamburgers on, but it's like bars, literally bars in the wall where there's a sitting room, and the bars are there, and you can see through the bars. On the other side is your family or visitors, where you can receive visitors, and you can say hello, and I don't know if they shake hands or what. It depends on
there's really no eye contact.
Depending on the time period, but it was a very harsh time. But just so everyone knows that the cloistered Carmelites in the time that Therese and her sisters joined was very austere. So Louis could probably only see his daughters maybe once a week. And again, visits were very, very brief. The cloister life is a beautiful life, though. I mean, I don't want people to say, I would never do that. Well, it's a very beautiful life. And what is that set apartness is these are brides of Christ that have been totally given over to Jesus to live a hidden, hidden life of a convent community that is pretty much totally separated from the world.
And these girls, Louis and Zélie were very successful in their business. They never lived lavishly, but they always had enough. And to go from a fairly affluent family to an austere, cloistered life, that really, again, speaks volumes to the devotion of Zélie and Louis and the impression that they had. And so he loses his daughters eventually over a period of time, but he's also losing his mind.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
Louis succumbed to dementia or Alzheimer's.
He had a stroke going to Mass one day.
There was a couple of strokes that he had.
So who's had family members have a stroke?
Right.
Right? I mean, whose spouse, we even have people in our own parish who have strokes, caring for their spouses. So we have that happening. Lou, you mentioned dementia.
Dementia.
How many people have people in their families that are suffering from dementia right now?
The tipping point for the family, which was a great embarrassment to them, Therese had just left and entered the cloistered life, and he just wandered off. So Louis just wandered. He just took a walk and went missing. And they found him, and then they had to put him in a mental institution.
Now, what I learned,
and she was blamed for that. See, Therese was almost blamed. If the daughters were at home with him, he wouldn't have lost his mind the way he was. Now, Celine, who was a little older than Therese, she stayed, and Leonie stayed with him to care for him. But it was a great source of suffering for the daughters in the cloister.
Yeah. Well, what I learned too is that one day he actually got a gun. He got his gun out.
Okay.
Because he thought there was a war coming.
Mm-hmm.
And he had to protect his daughters, right? So, but that was, I think, the tipping point where they had to put him in a psychiatric institution, an asylum is what it would have been.
It was
called.
An asylum.
And back then, this was not. These were not good places. These were places people didn't really know what to do with people who were losing their minds. They didn't know much about dementia and how to treat it. But even there, I learned that Louis still gave good holy example. Still prayerful. Gentle, and his holiness was still apparent even when he was losing his mind, which was a sad suffering for him too, because he valued his sharp mind. He was a watchmaker, and so, and then he ends up passing away, without his. I don't know if his daughters they couldn't be there, could they? Wow. See, I didn't really. So tell me about that.
Well, Celine was able to bury him, and Leonie, but no. Once you enter the cloister, you are there for life.
So was there anyone around for him when he was? Everyone was in the convent at this point, right?
Not everyone. Celine and Leonie were still at home.
Okay.
But both of them were still aspiring to the religious life. But they thought, well, maybe we need to take care of our father here as well, which they did.
Okay.
But no, Therese could not be there for the funeral, nor could her other sisters who were already in the cloister. You can't leave. But as soon as he died, then Celine entered the same cloister as Therese and some of her other sisters, to the chagrin of some of the other sisters there. Like, this is too many blood relations in one place.
Too many Martins.
And then Leonie did become, and we don't give Leonie enough credit. She's a great. I think she should be considered.
Well, I heard that they're opening her cause.
Yeah, she really suffered as well.
Leonie,
lots of sorrow in her life and depression, and really struggled with that. So they were a normal family in many ways who had many common struggles today, but yet they trusted in God throughout the entire process and become for us this great example.
And you have this married couple with lots of children running around and temper tantrums, and both of them are working. I just think it's important that married couples see, doesn't this resound like pretty much like your typical Catholic family is trying to raise the kids, do the right thing, be holy, and struggling. And I think that couples can feel so discouraged, like, my kids are noisy at Mass, I'm always getting up, I don't know, and, they're struggling, got another baby on the way, I've got so many families here expecting babies, which is so wonderful, but some families, one family having 3 under 3, about to, and that's, I think that married couples can feel like they're so overwhelmed with family life that can they be holy? It's like, but that is where you will become holy.
That's right.
You're going to become holy right there with all those babies close in age, or right there with your many children growing up and starting to leave home, and when your spouse is ill, or when someone in the family dies, God forbid, but certainly we know, loss of children that have died, stillborn or at young ages from tragedies. Zélie and Louis Martin right there. Not one, but 4.
Right. And to have the courage to have more.
Right. Yeah. And to keep having more children in her older age. So just it's really exciting for me to have met them, and I hope that Catholics will look into their lives and be inspired by them, because they're inspiring to me. And it's a time in which we just so need to see married saints, that we can see, marriage is the first sacrament. I mean, it was the first one that was in creation before the fall.
Yeah, that's true.
And
and this is what makes us saints. I think about, how Jesus says, I was hungry and you fed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink.
Babies.
But Mary and Joseph actually did that to him.
Right.
I mean, this was the common, ordinary task of feeding the child, clothing the child, giving the child something to drink. That can be as sanctifying as praying the liturgy of the hours in a cloister, if you do it faithfully, and with grace.
Anything can be sanctified. Anything can be used to sanctify you. I think that's important to know.
Yeah.
Say, well, I'm not in the church doing church things, so I can't be holy. Totally wrong.
That's right.
Totally wrong.
Yeah, so there's
doing
always
what God's asked of you.
Right. So again, we go back to the saintly people kind of make you feel less than, but the example of saints like Zélie and Louis make us feel encouraged, and we should be encouraged.
Yeah, we should be.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Father.
Yep.
Thank you all for listening and watching. And next week, I guess we'll need to talk about purgatory and judgment and everything.
Sure.
Why not?
Why not?
Yeah. Thank you for listening. If you want more information about our parish, great things happening here, please go to our website at stmccg.org. Or if you've got a topic that you would like for us to discuss and Father to address, drop us an email. You'll find my email address on the website as well. So on behalf of Father Rossi, I am Shane Page. Thank you for watching and listening. We'll see you next time. God bless.